Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we're talking about the trial of the Chicago 7. This came out back in September on Netflix. The film is about people I hadn't heard of.
Yes.
Even though they actually kind of intersect with another film we've seen very recently, Judas and the Black Messiah. Fred Hampton shows up in this, although I don't think there's evidence to suggest that he actually did show up in the trial, sitting behind Bobby Seale the way he does here. I think that was put in so that his death, when you hear about it, would make sense and feel connected. So at the Democratic National Convention in 1968, prior to that year's election, there was a riot, maybe a number of riots, in the August that year.
Yes.
A lot of kind of members of the counterculture, kids, hippies, so on and so forth, showed up at the Democratic National Convention to protest the Vietnam War, which at this point had gone on for, since 55, so 13 years at this point. And riots erupted. And part of the question of the film is how did they start and who started them? Clashes with the police. I think it's interesting that you don't see any police getting hurt. I mean, I find it hard to imagine there weren't any. The film is beyond on the side of the protesters and so on. And I guess making a statement against the kids and the students and so on, 8 of them initially, and then Bobby Seale was declared a mistrial, were put on trial together. The claim was that they had conspired together to go to Chicago to cause violence and so on, and this is what they denied. And so, in very Aaron Sorkin style, the film is written and directed by him, it is set within the courtroom, almost entirely as a framing device, and then you go into many, many flashbacks and memories and so on of how they got there, what actually happened. You get kind of inactions, as it were, of people's testimony. This happened, and then you see it. It's got the most amazing cast.
Yes.
So let's read out. These are the 7 defendants: Eddie Redmayne, Sacha Baron Cohen, Alex Sharp, Jeremy Strong, John Carroll Lynch, Noah Robbins, and Daniel Flaherty. Other roles: Yahya Abdul-Mateen, Mark Rylance, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Frank Langella, Michael Keaton. It's got a hell of a cast.
It's got a hell of a cast, and I want to once again reiterate what a problem I find in this casting. So on the one hand, my first response is, isn't this a marvelous cast, right? All these starry names, that are wonderful to see. But I think this is a drama about American history. And I think that casting these British actors is, to me, a real problem. Even though I think some of them, like Eddie Redmayne and Mark Rylance, they give very good performances, but they're performances that are in a way not embodied, right? Like, there's a body language and a set of attitudes and a set of responses to particular situations that, don't, to me, ring true. And partly it's because they don't inhabit, that kind of history, legacy, space. I mean, American culture is different. And I find it almost, I was going to say obscene, and that's too strong a word. But the directors and the actors themselves don't pay attention to that, or not, is so contradictory, because, so much of an actor's language is about sense memory, right? Yeah, about touching on past experiences, right? To kind of evoke or understand or depict, right? And to move across a culture, what sense memory, both individual and collective, are you tapping into, right? To convey whatever that is. So you could say, oh, well, you're not attributing enough imagination to actors, perhaps, And
it is acting.
And it is acting, but, what does acting draw on? Acting draws on experience and knowledges and things that are in the air, that are unconscious. And, actors often talk about that, You learn your lines, you think through your movement, and then you let yourself go. Well, what are you letting yourself go into from one culture to another?
Well, there's also research. I mean, that's a huge amount, that's why an actor can take on something that isn't where they were brought up. Or
there is research.
And none of these people lived in 1968. A couple of the older ones, maybe.
It's true, but they would have had parents who did, or photographs, or I look
Well, that's
at
research.
Well, I mean, I suppose everything can be learned, but I don't think everything can be learned in a short amount of time. Yeah.
You don't know how long they had. I do understand what you mean, and I've agreed with this to some degree on other occasions. I'm not sure I do agree with it here. I'm not sure there's enough in it to... I mean, well, I think the reason I don't agree with it here is because 2 of the 3 British actors, Sacha Baron Cohen, Eddie Redmayne and Mark Rylance, 2 of those I think gave exceptional performances.
Well, I do. So this is, where I'm going to hopefully not contradict myself, but add a layer of argument. Because I do think that Benedict Cumberbatch gives a very good performance.
In this?
Yes,
He's not in this.
Oh, sorry. Who am I thinking of? Eddie Redmayne. You see, Eddie Redmayne is more easily confused with Benedict Cumberbatch than he is with Tom Hayden.
Yeah. No. You weren't going to say that Tom Hayden gave a very good performance.
No, but the thing is that I think he gives a very good performance. But, I've seen footage of Tom Hayden in marches in the early 70s, right? Mm-hmm. He has this whole Irish American vibe going on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the way that he talks, the way that he walks is kind of rangy and he's sexy. Yeah, and what you have in Redmayne is somebody who's stiffened up, right? Who kind of has obviously learned certain postures. Yeah, but in between postures, he's not kind of,
Well, he may not be being the real Tom Hayden. He may not be embodying that, but it may very well be a decision to play the character in a different way. I mean, one of the things is I was looking at...
Well, with him, it's clearly a decision. I mean, you can tell. Everything is thought through.
One of the things I was looking at after the film just finished was various websites that say, what is the truth of the film, The Trial of the Chicago 7? And there are very many places that it diverges from real events. Certain things are true, certain things are not true, certain things are partially true. It's a film that plays fast and loose with the truth, and one of the places that it may well play fast and loose with the truth is in the characterizations of the people involved.
Yes.
I don't necessarily find that to be a problem when I think that Eddie Redmayne played his character as well as he did and gave a performance that made sense in the context of the film, in context of the character as it's written.
Well, I mean, again, who is it making sense to? I'd be curious to know what Americans thought of that performance. I mean, though I'm sure it got good reviews, so maybe I'm just being wrong about it.
People really like Sacha Baron Cohen, and we both emerged from the film saying he wasn't very good in this. Yes, so I don't know really what the American response has to say.
I'm coming across as very didactic, and I don't mean that. So I'm not saying that people should just play their nationality or whatever. But this is a recurring pattern, right, in American cinema, to have all these British actors play roles. And, we've talked about how sometimes it bothers me and sometimes it doesn't. This is a case, that it does bother me. And I think part of the reason that it does bother me is because it's a historical drama about recent history. They couldn't find an American actor to do it. Yeah, and they couldn't find an American actor who would draw on, kind of a better... knowledge of just almost like kind of invisible things, really. Kind of, the culture you imbibe when you grow up, ways of talking and speaking and sitting and reacting. I do find a lot of upper class Brit in Eddie Redmayne's performance.
Well, I don't know about finding someone better or whether they could have. He's got an Oscar. I mean, you want him in the film.
Well, many American actors also have Oscars, and, many American actors of his generation or younger, could get Oscars. I really have a problem with this type of casting and this type of role. All
right, sure. Well, I think the way it may make sense to me is that when we talked about 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri,
yes,
and we talked about the kind of overall lack of respect that film seemed to show for the place where it was set,
yes,
the lack of respect for actually understanding it and representing it in a way that seemed plausible and realistic. And I can understand that argument taken to actors as well. You just got this guy and then they didn't do the work or whatever it might be.
Well, and you see this in this film as well. I'm looking for Abbie Hoffman's place of birth, which I
Massachusetts.
Right, okay. Sacha Baron Cohen goes in and out.
His accent is abysmal.
Yes.
And I've never actually been convinced by any of his accents. I mean, they've always been very broad, and he's obviously got away with his accents a lot because he does candid camera stuff and talking to real people. He gets away with his accents all the time.
Yeah.
So, clearly within the characters that he plays and within the real life situations he gets away with them, here it's broad and often fails and doesn't work. I mean, I heard London coming out of it a lot.
Yes, I did as well. I
think it's a bad accent.
But, I'm not someone who fetishizes accents either.
No.
But I think these figures are so important, in kind of American culture and so known. I mean, even I grew up seeing pictures of, Abbie Hoffman with his hair and his daisies and so on, right? Like, I must say, Sacha Baron Cohen doesn't evoke any of that to me, and he's way too old to be cast in this role. But I think to a different degree, it's also, to me, true of
Redmayne,
yeah. And one gives a good performance, I think, and one gives a bad performance. But it's a good performance that, to me, an American actor of his quality would have brought many more dimensions to.
Sure. I liked Redmayne's voice an awful lot, which is not just his accent, but the quality of his voice, the depth of it. Yes. I don't know the real Tom Hagen's voice. He's not a figure I grew up with or anything like that. I just liked it here. That it felt like more than putting on an accent. He was embodying the character more deeply.
Yes, he's really good,
and I like that very much. It's a very lively film in the way it's structured and edited. And I think
I don't know. It all reminds me a little bit of like Stanley Kramer cinema. Mm-hmm. Though I think Sorkin is better just, because he's got this really lively intelligence and, he's such a great writer, I think. But, they really are about a message and a politics. And I think it all comes across as really middlebrow to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It comes across as a lesson by someone who knows better, to teach the audience X. And it's very intelligent. The dialogue is often memorable. He knows how to design dramatic moments for his actors, right? But it doesn't add up to my idea of a great film. I think these incidents are important to dramatize. I often question why I'm looking at it, and it's a sign of American imperialism that we're even watching this and kind of commenting on it and so on, right? I mean, if it weren't an American film, we wouldn't know, we wouldn't be interested, most of us wouldn't care, unless you had your uncle was American or whatever, right?
That's true.
So I think there is I feel kind of drawn into an imperial discourse that I'm resistant to in watching.
That's true. The students chant, the whole world is watching, and we are.
And we
they're not wrong.
Kind of.
Because maybe there are students in Ethiopia chanting the whole world is watching, and
nobody is.
So these students happen to be right. And it's a very interesting story to kind of learn about. I understand that Sorkin... I was nervous to watch this film because I read back in August, I think, before the film came out, that Aaron Sorkin had been approached with this story, but Steven Spielberg in 2006 had said to him, this would be a good thing to get your teeth into. And he'd sort of gone, oh yeah, brilliant, count me in. And then after meeting Steven Spielberg, he'd gone, I haven't heard of these guys. And people were saying, like, someone who's written political drama in America for this long hasn't heard of the Chicago 7. So it's, look, some people have blind spots, maybe it's forgivable, but...
Well, not everybody can know everything.
Yeah.
So, nobody can know everything. But it does surprise me, that an American political commentator, a writer of political dramas, someone who's in show business would not know, that Tom Hayden, was part of this history, and thus be able to link up a few names next to that history. I don't quite believe that.
Well, I remember a line in the Newsroom, which was the newsroom based drama that Sorkin wrote, where the main character talking to his producer, and they talk about Abbie Hoffman levitating the Pentagon, and the main character says, you can't levitate the Pentagon, it's really heavy. It's kind of classic Sorkin, witty, snappy, blah blah blah. So there's obviously some, and I'd heard of Abbie Hoffman, I must say, although I didn't really know what I connected him to. So there's also there's at least something residual that kind of, has lasted from this. But apparently Sorkin was kind of learning about this over the last, like I say, it's been that was 2006, so 13, 14 years of development at least.
I mean, I must say, I didn't know the ins and outs of the trial, right? I mean, I just knew about the Chicago Convention and, the trial, and, I knew about Jerry Rubin and Abbie Hoffman and Bobby Seale and Tom Hayden. I wouldn't have been able to name other names other than those.
Yeah.
Right. And I didn't know the ins and outs, or, kind of what the trial was like, or,
sure.
But it shocks me that someone my age and an American wouldn't know that. It certainly would contradict everything I've been saying about actors.
So it's interesting because everything that Sorkin does best, I think, is kind of on display here in his writing, as you said. The way he structures scenes, the way dialogue flows, the jokes that he's able to get out of it, the way that he develops drama throughout scenes and builds up to moments. He's very, very good at all that, and that's why I can watch so much of what Sorkin does, even though I'm aware that so much of it is kind of trash. Maybe trash is actually where he sings.
I don't think it's trash. I do think it's kind of, well, two things. Let me begin. So I agree with you, but what he doesn't know how to do is do the same thing with the camera that he does with his writing.
Because he's directing it.
Because he's directing it. So, whereas his writing knows how to build up moments, yeah? And how to develop character, and how to kind of draw in, a line that'll make you laugh and break the mood of a piece and so on. He doesn't know how to do that with a camera. And I think he doesn't even know how to, construct a dramatic moment audiovisually, right? You take his dialogue out, and he doesn't know what to do, right?
I think that's true.
So I think the films become middling in a way that maybe, the screenplay is not. That the screenplay is of a higher quality than the film itself. I think it's super intelligent, and often very witty, right? I also think so the reason why, for me, it remains kind of middle brow and, doesn't push you any further than that, is because almost he doesn't allow for doubt or incomprehension or kind of things that are beyond understanding. I mean, so he'll allow for contradiction, right? So the young man who's a revolutionary but who wants to come across as a nice kid, to his in-laws, those kinds of contradictions in character he allows you to see, right? But kind of other elements of human desire or ego, or kind of, they don't explode through in ways that feel human but maybe like outside of rational understanding. Everything is rational in Sorkin.
And also people are playing quite rigid types, I think.
Yes.
The characters bounce off each other exactly the way you would expect them to from how they're set up. You've got is it Dellinger, who's the older guy who's literally a Boy Scout leader, as he says, and a pacifist, although he does turn around and throw a punch at one point in this. Didn't happen, apparently. You got Redmayne, who kind of respects the court and understands that there's a kind of procedure that he has to try and follow if he's going to get off. And then you have Abbie Hoffman, who's a real wild card, and he's there to make political statements and so on. And that's all well and good, but when they interact, there's no room for a surprise. I mean, apart from the one I suppose would be when Abbie Hoffman, when that tape comes in of Redmayne stoking the crowd, and they say, this is going to kill the trial or whatever. And Abbie Hoffman kind of stands up for him and says, no, you're a really smart guy, and I like you. Like, they've been at each other's throats a bit throughout the whole film. So it's the surprise there is built in that, actually, he respects him and likes him. Apart from that, there's nothing that organic about it.
But even those things are a bit of a cliche. As you say, they are built in. So what he shows is, like, people within a very narrow range, that is predetermined, by what he sets up as the structure of the drama. You also see that in the character of Tom Hayden, who's ostensibly a revolutionary, but he's going to be a success, right? Because, he's going to mainstream this into a different kind of a career. He wears a suit, he's respectful, and then you expect him he stands up at the Bobby Seale thing, where he says unconscionably, but then that at the end there's going to be kind of this response of solidarity. But again, that's built in because the standing up for Bobby Seale then requires him to compensate by standing up by calling all the dead and all the Vietnamese, all the young men who died in Vietnam. So it's almost cliche-ish, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
we've seen another film recently about a kind of biased trial, which was Mangrove.
Yes.
In Small Axe.
Yes.
Which, to be fair, I don't actually remember too many details, but wasn't the judge in that similarly kind of biased against the defendants as he is here? Although the judge here is off the charts in the decisions he makes and how every single objection is overruled immediately, doesn't listen, all this.
And that's a great performance.
Frank Langella is the judge.
Yeah. Kind of the way that he comes into the courtroom, like kind of, distracted and with his mouth open. Like, I mean, like, it already, his very presence kind of, brings up kind of a perspective and an attitude and a point of view, which I think is absolutely marvelous. And also, again, not to belabor this point, but his whole body language and kind of in entering the courtroom and so on, it kind of evokes a kind of a depth of understanding and knowledge about that which he is representing and expressing that to me some of the British performers don't. Yeah, no,
he's a famous judge, and he's often been in court.
Well, he knows how how the American justice system works.
Yeah. I think it is possible to belabor that point somehow.
All right, I'll drop it.
He knows how Americans walk. I mean, come on. I do keep thinking about it in relation to Mangrove because they're so similar, right? That these mass trials of, to put it very broadly, countercultural figures, counter-establishment figures, in the face of a biased system that wants to kind of send them down, but actually finds out that it can't. They were sentenced to the end of this, but then on appeal, the sentences were all revoked. But Mangrove was so rich and so detailed, and you felt the one thing that they shared that's interesting is in both films the characters have a sense of, or some of the characters have a sense of how important the trial is beyond just whether they go to jail or not. They're aware of it as a cultural moment. And I suppose a moment in legal history and something important because of precedents it will set, because of the way it will look. It's much simpler here, though. It's much simpler. There's maybe a conversation or two, and there's nothing you wouldn't expect. It was much richer in Mangrove.
It's simpler and visually illiterate. Mangrove is the work of a visual artist. Imagine what Steve McQueen would have done with the image of Bobby Seale gagged and bound in a courtroom. I mean, think of, how many powerful images he would have created, images that would have remained in your unconscious and resonated. Sorkin writes that and then presents it as if it's just somebody sitting in the courtroom, in long shot, right? Without any kind of visual design as to how to make that image, of a black man gagged and bound in a courtroom in the United States. He doesn't know what to do. It's shocking, the lack of skill, and imagination in the visual presentation of that moment. And I think that's absolutely typical of the film.
That's an excellent point. Very well made. It's true. That's such a powerful thing to find. And that did happen. That's not a Sorkin invention. I checked. As I checked everything, it happened. And it's a waste of an image.
Yeah. I mean, and that, I think, speaks of the kind of film that it is, right? Socially conscious, intelligent, about a historical incident, i.e. prime Oscar contender,
exactly.
Right? But also typical Oscar contender in that it's so far removed from any kind of art. And
it's just giving you what you want. I mean, that's the thing that I find with the Newsroom. And the thing is, I can watch the Newsroom again and again. It's one of the enduring shames of my life. Because the thing about the Newsroom is that is the American left's l'esprit de l'escalier, right? Like 2 years after real news things happened, you have this liberal American news network invented by Aaron Sorkin covering the story the way that they should have covered it, if only, So it's like, this is what we would have done if we'd been smart enough at the time. And it's absolute, this the kind of liberal comfort food that just gives you what you want. But I can lap it up. I can look at it and know that that's exactly what it's doing. But I am completely okay with it because I like the characters, I like the way they're written, I like how everything flows, and to some degree, I like the fantasy of how this should have gone. And there's some of that I can apply to the trial of Chicago 7. Like, I could watch this again. It would carry me through. The dialogue and the performances, that kind of snappiness that it does have, would carry me through. Although I think it's interesting that there is something organic to the dialogue that I think you don't often get with Sorkin, actually. There's something more realistic about it that I don't think I often think I get. It's not as theatrical as he usually is, I don't think. Or as showy.
I mean, I like it very much, you know, and it's affecting. I mean, people found, or friends of mine found the ending, you know, with everybody rising to be like a cliche, which of course it is. Nonetheless, I found it affecting.
It's. I mean, I was thinking about what you're saying about his filmmaking technique and what he knows how to do there is bump up the soundtrack.
Yes,
soundtrack overwhelms that, and that's why you kind of feel the way it's meant to make you feel, and it does. I can also fill you in that John Dellinger apparently read the names, and it happened before. It did happen, but it just wasn't by Tom Hayden. It wasn't at the end of the trial.
Well,
it turns it into a very, it turns it into the moment that it is.
Yes, and it turns it into a redemption of Tom Hayden.
Yeah.
Which...
the development of Tom Hayden's character is interesting because he's the one who is respecting the court and so on and so forth, and the other members of the Chicago 7 are decrying him for that. And the redemption is to some degree kind of enforced because when that tape comes out of him saying this thing, if blood is going to run, let it run all over the city or something like that, which basically makes him out to be, actually, of all the people who were there, none of them started this riot, really. They were just there, and they're being framed, framed might be putting it strongly, but, they're being made out to be something they're not. And then you get this tape and you go, oh wait, the mild one, the respectful one, he's the one. So...
Well, I mean, it's very interesting because he's seen, or he's depicted as having more of a fervor for change than the others, but also being more opportunistic than the others, and both more scared and braver. So he is given a different status than the other characters. I think he's seen in a better light than the others, and that might just very well be because subsequent events proved to be not very kind to Abbie Hoffman or Jerry Rubin, right? I think one committed suicide, and the other one became a stockbroker.
Hoffman committed suicide at around Sacha Baron Cohen's age.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did find, and this is a recurring problem in films when dealing with these events, because I do think you would have had a different film, a better film, had you cast like at least a decade younger, if maybe even two.
He is 2 decades older than...
He is 2 decades older, and Rubin was quite old, compared to the others, right? I think he was older than the others. So I think, Tom Hayden would have been like 29 or something, and Rubin would have been 32, and I mean, some of the others were clearly, students or grad student age, right? So if you cast people in their 20s or early 30s, this would have had a completely different type of energy, right? Whereas you're casting people really from their 30s to their 50s. Yeah, I mean, how old is Eddie Redmayne?
39.
There you go, you see. To have cast an actor a decade younger, would have brought a whole different type of energy. And I think it's important because also there are questions of libido. There's a sexual energy as well, I think, in your 20s, right? So part of your other activities, work and activism and doing things, right? It's partly, it's partly just being young and having lots of energy, but there is a kind of a sexual dimension to it, right? Which is completely lacking here, I think. Especially, when you're shown kind of orgies is the wrong word because, in fact, Rubin says that they didn't have sex, but, you're shown these dark rooms with like several men and women and romantic, in quotation mark, situations. But that whole kind of energy is missing, right? And I think it's interesting because, when I was looking up Hayden's age, he married at 21, right? So, there is kind of that whole thing, that's that should be a part of this film, and that it isn't at all.
Is it an improvement on Molly's Game, which is the other feature he directed?
Yes, I do think it's an improvement on Molly's Game. I mean, all I can remember of Molly's Game is Jessica Chastain looking beautiful and smart and being great. That's all.
Right.
I can't. So I think this is a more complex story. It involves a lot more characters, which are very different.
It's true. He's marshalling more material.
Yeah, and putting it together. So I think this is a more complex and better work.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, I was impressed by, if not the look, but the scale of some of those courtroom scenes or riot scenes. So there's so many people, and actually so many important actors, important roles to be managing and balancing.
Yes.
I found that quite impressive to see. Maybe it's something that I feel I don't see outside of like Avengers Endgame, where like the crossover. This is like a crossover of countercultural protesters. I also think it's interesting in obviously when it came out, America was like, I suppose at that time, coming out of the riots for George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, who'd been murdered in racially motivated motivated murders. And, it was just before the election, which Joe Biden won, and then obviously on January the 6th, we'd see Trump and Rudy Giuliani and his mates inciting violence the way that, the Chicago 7 is supposed to have.
Yes.
So it's interesting how the film's obviously been in development for a very long time, picked up relevance, just before its release. And then on the other, I was also thinking how, in this country, we've got this anti-protest bill has it gone through? Is it going through? Where the government is taking the opportunity to stop people protesting by, I think they're essentially using COVID safety as the excuse. Don't gather, and we're going to make it illegal for you to protest.
Yes.
I mean,
it is unbelievable. I think, to me, what you describe, which I agree with, but it also makes me think that the film is even more conservative. So it's not you saying it's picking up on those things, and I think yes.
Oh no, I don't think it's picking up on them. I said it picked up relevance by accident because of the time it came out.
Yes, because you see, the film makes it seem that an act of corruption, which is somebody endangering people's lives and reputation out of pique for his. The person who previously occupied his office because he handed it to him just an hour before, right? Which is a corrupt thing to do. You have to use your office for personal gain or
motives.
But they make it seem as if like this is this horrible thing, right? With the horrible things that we saw all through Trump's presidency, are so beyond that, right? That it hardly comes across as a revelation. So, anyway, what I do want to say is how wonderful I think Michael Keaton is.
Yes.
He gives a very sparse, clean performance. It's just kind of a few looks, a few gestures, no great variation in his tone of voice. But he makes that person both kind of human and also like entertaining. Anyway, any last things to say about the film?
It wasn't nearly as painful as I had expected it to be.
Good point. That's true of me as well.
Based on what I vaguely read about, this guy hadn't heard of this, and
I must say it's been cropping up on my Netflix for a long time, and every time I see it, I go, "Ugh, not now!" Right?
Yeah, but no, it's decent.
Yeah.
So I'm all right with that.
So it's one of those films that you feel you should see, but then you think, "Oh, it's not going to be a lot of fun," and you avoid it. And actually, it was a lot more fun than I expected it to be.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. And I suppose also in the plus column, I was pleasantly surprised at how the racial aspects to the trial, basically the treatment of Bobby Seale and the Black Panther presence and so on. I was surprised. I was surprised with how I suppose intelligently, that all seemed to be handled, you know. And actually, he gets his moment. I mean, he gets a lot of moments where he stands up and speaks for himself because his lawyer isn't there, and he keeps getting told to shut the fuck up, but he will not stop, and you really feel for him, and you feel his moments every time, you know. And the performance, that's Yahya Abdul-Mateen. It's wonderful. And then the moment where it's Redmayne and Rylance, when they go to see him to inform him that Fred Hampton's been murdered. He accuses Redmayne of kind of not being serious, I guess. You know, he says, like, what you're doing is you're telling off your dad. And so are all your white friends. And Redmayne goes, yeah, you might be right about that. And he goes, you can see how that's different to a rope hanging from a tree. And it's a powerful line, and it's delivered as such, and it's let, you know, there's not a comeback to it. You know, Sorkin is the king of you know, the witty rejoinder, and there is none at that point, and he lets the line sit there. He
does. Too bad he couldn't visualize it more powerfully.
No, that may be true, but it's still it's a sparse room, and it's a sparsely kind of shot scene. I didn't mind, you know, it
still felt wrong to me. You could have given more of a close up to Bobby Seale at that moment. I kind of, you know, this thing of keeping the camera at a distance, which is very characteristic of this film. In fact, I don't think works to its advantage, or certainly it's visually, the consistency of its use is dull visually.
Yeah, and it's a look that smacks of coverage.
Yes,
basically. Of a lot of safety shots.
Yeah, not knowing what to do.
Yeah, but a lot of decent lines. They should have called it A Few Good Bits.
And a lot of good bits, yeah, and not many great ones.
Yeah, right, that's fair enough.
All right, let's wrap it up here. I recommend that people see it.
Yeah, so do I.
So, thank you very much for listening. We are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.